Hey everybody, welcome back to Video. So today we're continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and more specifically the work in progress Nintendo 64 core. And I wanted to do something slightly different on today's test. I wanted to just test one retail game, and honestly, in all of my time testing all of these games, I find this one to be the most impressive and the most accurate to real hardware in my unofficial tests. So today we're going to be doing one game and one game only, and that is Sin and Punishment. Half because I just think this is working as good as real hardware as far as I can tell, and secondarily, it is the most requested retest on the channel because last time I showed this to you, it was not running 100%. Before I get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. Now, I know the core is not done, and this is not in any way, shape, or form a review of the core. I'm just going to make the following statement, and you can decide to do whatever you want with it. If you own a MiSTer FPGA and you own a Nintendo 64 and you want to do a new playthrough of Sin and Punishment, I would pick MiSTer FPGA over real hardware for this game. I'm sure there's other games I could say that about out there, but I just think with the ability to use different controllers like the Brawler 64 I use, it is a fundamentally more comfortable way to play with the control scheme. But as we get right into the game with all of the different VI filters turned on, it just looks spectacular on my screen. The softness of the sky there with dithering, all of the texture filtering, everything that the Nintendo 64 has to offer as far as visual features are concerned looking good here, and the performance being rock solid stable. This is just an experience that rivals and in a lot of ways beats real hardware. And the best part is you also get what I think is one of the Nintendo 64's greatest games as well. But leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite Nintendo 64 game is. I would be really curious. I do own a copy of Sin and Punishment Complete. I imported it probably like 15-16 years ago. I've been playing it ever since, and playing it here on MiSTer FPGA is as good as I ever remember it being. And the best part is because you can get analog support out of your MiSTer as well and the core, if you want to see this on a PVM or a CRT and get those scan lines going without filters on MiSTer, you can 100% do so. But just watch the cadence of the motion, watch the movement, watch the frame rate without me putting a frame rate counter up because I do not like those at this stage of the test. This is just butter smooth. The aiming reticle, all of the enemies on screen at once, the clouds scrolling in the background, the grass going by us, it just looks spectacular. And that's the fun thing about these tests. Last time I showed you this game, it was running at full speed, the graphics weren't glitchy, but none of the VI effects were basically done. The previous time I did this game, it would crash all the time, and it would run at about 6 to 8 frames per second, but when we saw those 6 to 8 frames, we were ultra excited to see it even booting on the core. That is how far this core has come in the 6 months it's been in development. I can sit here and start a new game of Sin and Punishment, not do any cuts, and know full well that it's not going to freeze on me, I'm not going to have any issues, I can just go on about my day doing this work, and you could load it up and play it. But I'm curious what games you've been playing, which games you've finished, because I have completed Sin and Punishment on the core. It is marked as completable on the spreadsheet, so it's a game that you can just decide to play today. And even when these enemies come in from the background in that kind of pseudo fog, it just looks amazing on the core. The Nintendo 64 I've never thought had the best video output, even if you mod it. I usually use S-Video for mine, so getting this really clear image with HDMI out, and then having all those different VI filters on top like the real hardware would do, will probably give you the best looking playthrough of something like Sin and Punishment outside of software emulation, and I do think this is beating even that. But we're through the first stage absolutely flawlessly, and we can move on to the next part of the game. And tell me down below as well if you want to see more tests like this where I do a deeper dive into one game to see how the performance is on the current core. Because pretty much every other testing video I have done has been like 6 games for 2.5 minutes each, where this is just one game for like 11 minutes. But I will say from the visuals to the performance of the controls, everything is amazing, and the soundtrack to Sin and Punishment is awesome, and it sounds spectacular coming out of the current core. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds and I'll be right back.
Watch out behind us! Nice shot! Keep it up! Take care of it, Saki!
Just sounds absolutely spectacular coming out of the core, and the best part is you get that clean digital audio out. Not that there's anything wrong with the ketchup and mayonnaise RCA cores of your Nintendo 64, but sometimes, especially depending on how good or bad your TV is, you're not going to get great audio out if you don't use external speakers, and that's why this core is so good. It's just a more efficient way to play Nintendo 64. And don't get me wrong, you know I love my original hardware, you know I've got my Nintendo 64 hooked up to my PVM as I record this audio, and that's because I have been doing in some background some little bit of testing just for myself for the voiceovers of this video, and I think probably in January I might start running slight comparisons just on the look and feel in the analog space. So tell me if you want to see some Nintendo 64 analog dedicated videos down below. But again, just going through this game, this is the real hardware experience, except it's not real hardware whatsoever. And that is how good the core is at this current stage. There are games that are indistinguishable from real hardware. Now that's not to say every single game you load up is going to be that. Pretty much every game does something slightly different with the hardware and the SDK of the Nintendo 64. So for every sin and punishment that works this well, there's going to be something like Jet Force Gemini that does not even get past the title screen. So this is not a core that's going to replace your Nintendo 64 at this point in time, unless you're playing something like Sin and Punishment. But that's not a knock on the core. You know I love this thing, guys. But that's why these long-term testing videos are kind of fun to do in lieu of comparisons, which everyone keeps asking for, and I'm not yet ready to compare it against real hardware. I don't do that until the core is done. But as we just play through, I'm not even cutting the footage here. The great thing about Sin and Punishment is that it is exciting enough that I really don't need to make cuts. But the second reason I'm not making any cuts, not like I would hide it from you, is so that you can see all of the gameplay without any distractions, and you can kind of pixel peep and see if there's anything that you don't like about the image or you notice. If you notice anything that is not correct, leave me a comment down below, because even though I have played this game a ton of times, I played pretty much every game in the Nintendo 64 library in the last 6 months for these tests, so my memory is absolutely shot. But as we go from the gameplay portion of this in-engine cutscene, you're going to notice that there was no hitching there whatsoever, and there really isn't any hitching in the core. Now, I was playing a lot of Nintendo 64 recently for some tests on Steam Deck for a different video I was working on and then canceled, and that does seem to like to hitch every once in a while. Now, don't think that I'm knocking software emulation. I think it's hugely important, and the fact that you can play every single Nintendo 64 game via software emulation is in and of itself an absolute triumph. I love all forms of being able to play these games. The more ways you can play them, the more available they are to you, and the more they are available to future people who've never played them before. But that's a big takeaway on the current core, is I don't have any of that software emulation hitching that I sometimes experience with Nintendo 64. But as this ship swoops in and out, the camera moves, the fluidity and smoothness is just outstanding. That is down to the developers of this game making an absolute 10 out of 10 banger for Nintendo 64, but it's also down to the core's ability to run this game and run it well. Even all of those particle effects, everything there, I have not seen a stray pixel out of place the entire time I've been watching this footage, both to play it as well as to do the voiceover, because I'm always kind of looking at the screen to see if I can pick up anything out of the corner of my eye. And let's run into this building here and go to the next level as well. And this game is just pretty. Outside of the core looking so good running it, this is a really outstanding looking Nintendo 64 game. I would say it's visually one of my favorite games on the system. It might not be the most technically complex looking game, but it just has such a vibe, such an art style, and so many nice colorways. All of it really does work well together, and that slight fogginess and blurriness in the back with all of the different VI implementations really does aid to soften up the image and make it look that much better than it would if we didn't have those features turned on. And I know in earlier tests I talked about which filters people liked and didn't. I think for Sin and Punishment here, absolutely everything turned on like default hardware is the way to play. And the great part is the frame rate is staying stable. It doesn't matter how many enemies get on screen at once, it is not chugging anywhere. In some instances this might be running ever so slightly faster than real hardware, but I would honestly have to put direct side-by-side captures next to each other to find out. But if the core is running faster, that means that there is the ability later on in development to keep it running faster and to have different changes in settings to adhere it down to the stock frame rate of real Nintendo 64 hardware. And there are definitely games that do run faster than they should, but in a lot of instances that keeps slow down from rearing its head, and that's going to be a really exciting thing, because you guys all keep asking me about any sort of options for turbo modes in the future, and obviously if some games are running slightly faster than real hardware, that probably means that the turbo mode is just what you're playing, and the developments in the future will probably bring the speed down a little bit to get it to cycle accuracy. But again, just being able to play through the first 3 levels here with absolutely no issues whatsoever, it is just a ton of fun. And I can tell you, having completed this game and having talked to others that have completed it as well, this is the experience the entire way through. Sure, there's some games that still do not get past the title screen, but there's games like Sin and Punishment that allow you to play them from start to finish, just like you were using real Nintendo 64 hardware, and I think this does a better job than actually being the real hardware itself. But I have died, that's as far as I got, and that's a pretty good because it's 10 minutes and 30 seconds into the video, and that's about the average length for these as well. But if you want to play Sin and Punishment today on the current core, 100% go ahead and do so. You're going to have an outstanding experience, and it's really going to feel like you're just playing a real Nintendo 64, except with better video out the back. But that's the current situation on the current core for one single game, Sin and Punishment. And again, if you want to see these longer tests, tell me down below. I've been thinking about doing maybe 5 or 6 of them so we can do deeper dives into games that a lot of people are familiar with. But short of that, this core is absolutely outstanding, and as a review of sorts of its current situation, I cannot believe that it is this impressive. And I can't wait to see what Robert patches up in March as well. There's a lot of things going on, and we still have a lot more development time on Nintendo 64. But as a one game preview, this is just spectacular. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.